After losing everything, his job, his home, and his hope, Ethan Cole thought life was over. But on a lonely Montana road, with only his old dog by his side, he found something waiting for him, a $5 house, and a miracle he never saw coming. Sometimes, God doesn't send angels. Sometimes, he sends a dog. Before we start Journey, please take a few seconds to hit that subscribe button and let me know in the comments, where are you watching from? Chapter 1. The Man in the Red Dust Road. Gray rain stitched the sky to the prairie, and the wind carried the smell of rust and loneliness. Ethan Cole, 52, walked along the highway's shoulder with the slow, heavy rhythm of someone who had spent a lifetime enduring more than he'd ever received. He was tall, with shoulders built from decades of labor, though they now sagged as if the years had hung weights from them. His beard was streaked with iron gray, and his deep-set blue eyes had a quiet intensity, the kind of gaze that came from losing too much, but refusing to fall apart. His face bore the geography of struggle, a crooked nose from a fight long forgotten, weathered skin, and the faint scar of a man who'd worked with his hands, not words. At his side walked Ranger, a 5-year-old German shepherd whose coat shimmered dark bronze under the rain. Ranger's gait was smooth, disciplined, every step measured, every breath alert. A pale scar ran down his left foreleg, a souvenir from his old life in the K-9 unit, where he had served alongside a police handler who never returned from a night raid. Since that night, Ranger's loyalty had narrowed to one mission: to protect the quiet man who had found him in a shelter and called him partner. The two of them were bound by something deeper than circumstance, an unspoken pact between survivors. It had been 6 months since Forge and Rafter Manufacturing shut its doors. Ethan had worked there for 25 years, as a mechanic, a problem solver, the man they called when a machine screamed instead of purred. The factory was his second home, and its noise was the music of his life. Then one day, men in suits came, carrying clipboards and hollow smiles. They thanked him for his service, shook his hand, and left him with a severance check that wouldn't even cover his mother's hospital bills. Within a month, his savings were gone. Within 3, the house he'd built after his divorce was gone too. Now all that remained was an aging pickup truck, a backpack, and Ranger. Ethan had learned that, when life stripped you down to the bone, the only thing left to decide was whether to keep walking, or to lie down and let the dust bury you. The rain came harder as he reached a gas station long abandoned, its windows smashed, the pumps standing like skeletons of a forgotten world. A faded sign still clung to the wall: Harris Fuel and Repairs. The H was gone, leaving behind Aris, like a whisper of something that used to mean home. He pushed the door open, and it groaned like an old man waking from a bad dream. Inside, the shelves were empty, except for a few rusted cans and a broken coffee machine. Ranger shook off rainwater, then lay down near the counter, head resting on his paws but eyes still scanning every corner. Ethan dropped his pack and rubbed his hands together for warmth. "Well, buddy," he muttered, "this is as good as it gets tonight." The dog's ears twitched, and he let out a low, satisfied sigh, the sound of acceptance from a creature that asked for nothing but presence. Ethan crouched to check the contents of his pack. Half a loaf of bread, a can of beans, a photo of his mother smiling on a porch, and one folded newspaper page, something he had picked up at a diner the day before. He spread it out on the dusty counter to use as kindling, but a small classified caught his eye. For sale, property, 2 acres with cabin, price $5, abandoned, must assume all responsibility. Contact, Town Clerk, Birch Hollow, MT. He blinked, then read it again. $5. He snorted softly. Yeah, sure, and maybe they throw in a Cadillac too. But as the wind howled outside and the rain drummed against the roof, a quiet, desperate thought rose in him. What if it's real? He took out his wallet. $5, the last of it. Enough for a dream that probably wasn't real, but what did reality owe him anymore? The next morning, the rain stopped, leaving behind a road glistening like tarnished glass. Ethan shared the last of the bread with Ranger and started walking west. His boots squelched in the mud. The air smelled of wet pine and diesel ghosts. He walked for hours, thumb out whenever a truck passed, though few did. Around noon, an old red pickup finally slowed. The driver was Frank Dillard, a heavy-set man in his 60s, with a face like weathered bark, and eyes that squinted from years staring into sunlit fields. "You look like you've had better days," Frank said, voice rough but not unkind. Had worse, too, Ethan replied. Frank nodded, the way men of the plains do when they see another fighter still standing. Hop in. Where are you headed? Birch Hollow? Gonna see about a house? A house? Frank chuckled. Ain't much there but dust and ghosts. You sure? Ethan glanced at Ranger, sitting alert in the truck bed, then back at Frank. Yeah, pretty sure. Frank gave him a long look before driving off down the endless ribbon of highway. They didn't speak much, but something in Frank's silence felt like respect. When he finally dropped Ethan off at the turnoff for Birch Hollow, he handed him a thermos. Coffee's 2 days old, but it's warm. You'll need it. Ethan nodded. Thanks. The sun was sliding low when he finally saw the town, or what was left of it. Birch Hollow was more memory than a settlement, a scattering of leaning wooden buildings, a church whose steeple had surrendered to time, and a main street of gravel and wind. A sign hung crookedly from a post. Population 42. Ranger's ears pricked as they passed an old saloon turned into a general store. Ethan tied Ranger outside and stepped in. The smell of dust and cinnamon hit him first. Behind the counter stood Grace Holloway, though Ethan didn't yet know her name. She was in her late 40s, tall and willowy, her brown hair streaked with silver and tied loosely at the back. Her eyes were the soft gray of rain clouds, and her face bore the kind of beauty that had endured grief without surrender. Can I help you, stranger? She asked, her voice warm but guarded. Ethan placed the newspaper clipping on the counter. I'm looking for the town clerk. Says here there's property for sale. $5. Grace's eyebrows lifted. That old place? She hesitated. You sure you want that kind of trouble? Ethan's jaw tightened. Trouble doesn't scare me much anymore. Grace studied him for a long second, then pointed toward a brick building near the edge of the town. Town office. Last door on the right. If the clerk's not asleep, he'll take your money. He thanked her and turned to leave. As he reached the door, she called after him. Be careful out there, Mr. Cole. Ethan Cole. Be careful, Mr. Cole. Some houses don't want to be lived in. Outside, the light had turned the dust red as blood. Ranger barked once, low and uneasy. Ethan frowned and looked down the empty street. For a heartbeat, he could have sworn he saw a shadow move inside one of the abandoned buildings. Tall, human, but wrong somehow, lingering just out of sight. When he looked again, there was nothing. He stood there, rain jacket flapping in the wind, and whispered to Ranger, Looks like we found our kind of place, partner. The dog's eyes narrowed toward the darkened window. His ears flattened. A low growl rumbled from his chest. Not fear, but warning. Ethan stared into the gathering dusk, feeling the first stirrings of something he hadn't felt in a long time, a reason to keep moving forward, and the faint, electric edge of danger. And somewhere beyond the red dust, something was waiting for them. Chapter 2. The House on the Hill and the Nameless Night. The road to the property wound upward through a forest of whispering pines, their branches dripping from the earlier rain. Ethan Cole's boots sank slightly into the soft earth as he climbed, with Ranger trotting close beside him, ears twitching at the smallest rustle in the undergrowth. The fog clung low, heavy, and motionless, turning the world around them into shifting silver. When the trees thinned, Ethan finally saw it, the house. It stood alone on the crest of a hill, a weathered 2-story cabin with a sagging porch and faded green shutters hanging crookedly. The roof was scarred with missing shingles, and one of the windows stared blankly like an empty eye socket. A broken windmill squealed with each turn, its rusted blades slicing the mist like the cry of something that should have stayed silent. Ethan exhaled, half awe, half disbelief. Well, partner, he murmured to Ranger, $5 buys a lot of ghosts. The dog sniffed the ground, fur bristling. His growl was soft, uncertain. Not fear, but awareness. Ethan's chest tightened, not from dread but recognition. He had lived long enough to know when a place carried history too heavy to stay buried. Inside, the air smelled of damp wood and dust. The floorboards moaned under his weight, and each room seemed to breathe. Slow, tired, alive. A few pieces of furniture remained. A table, a chair missing a leg, a bookshelf that had slumped against the wall. In the corner, a family photograph sat on the floor, glass cracked, but faces visible. A man in uniform stood beside a woman and a small boy. The uniform caught Ethan's attention. Police blues, badge still visible. He knelt, brushing the dirt from the man's nameplate. J. Monroe. The name tugged at something buried in Ranger. The dog stiffened, ears pricked, nose pressing toward the photograph. He whined, low, pained, remembering. Ethan stared. "You knew him?" Ranger barked once, sharply, as if answering yes. It hit Ethan suddenly. The clipped training posture, the disciplined alertness. Ranger had served under this man. This had been his handler's home, and now it was his. The day passed in the rhythm of rebuilding. Ethan patched holes with boards scavenged from a collapsed shed, gathered dry kindling from the edge of the woods, and cleared a space near the fireplace. Ranger followed him constantly, watching, guarding. As evening fell, the mist returned, curling around the house like fingers. The hills went silent except for the wind sighing through the pines. Ethan lit a fire, sat beside it, and let the warmth soak into his bones. For the first time in months, he felt something resembling peace, fragile but real. He reached down, scratching behind Ranger's ears. "Maybe this is it, boy. The end of the road." The dog's eyes reflected the firelight. Intelligent, loyal, but uneasy. He turned his head toward the door and gave a low growl. Ethan frowned. "What is it?" Outside, something scraped against the porch. Once, twice, then silence. He stood, rifle in hand, and opened the door. Only fog greeted him, thick and unbroken. The porch boards were wet but undisturbed. The forest whispered. Nothing more. "Must have been the wind," Ethan muttered, though his voice lacked conviction. Ranger didn't relax. He stared at the far edge of the yard, growling under his breath until Ethan finally called him inside. The storm arrived after midnight. Rain hammered the roof, and the old windows rattled in their frames. Ethan lay awake on a thin mattress in the front room, eyes fixed on the ceiling, where shadows swam in the flickering light of the dying fire. Then came the sound, a soft, deliberate scratching. It came from the kitchen first, then shifted, scraping along the floorboards toward the hallway. Ranger was on his feet in an instant, body rigid, a low rumble in his throat. Ethan grabbed the lantern and moved toward the noise. The scratching stopped. For a heartbeat, the house held its breath. Then a faint whimper echoed from below. Ethan's pulse quickened. The floor vented a draft cold enough to sting his ankles. Ranger barked once, sharp, commanding, and ran toward the trapdoor beneath the stairs. It was half hidden under a torn rug. Ethan knelt and pulled it open. The air that rose up was colder than the rain outside, tinged with rot and something metallic. He shone the lantern down the steps. Two glowing eyes stared back at him. Ranger barked again, but this time the sound was different, confused, not threatened. Ethan descended slowly, each step creaking beneath him. The lantern light caught movement. A small shape curled in the corner, trembling violently. It was a puppy, no more than 3 months old, thin to the bone, with fur matted from neglect. Its coat was the same sable pattern as Ranger's, though lighter, almost golden under the dirt. The animal whimpered when Ethan approached, trying to crawl backward into the shadows. "Easy now," Ethan whispered, crouching low. "We're not gonna hurt you." Ranger stepped forward and sniffed the puppy, then nudged its flank gently with his nose. The smaller dog responded with a faint, desperate lick. Ethan's throat tightened. He set the lantern down and took off his jacket, wrapping the trembling body inside it. The puppy weighed almost nothing. "What kind of hell did you crawl out of, little one?" he murmured. Back upstairs, he dried the pup by the fire, spooning a bit of canned beans into a bowl and adding water. The puppy devoured it in seconds, tail twitching faintly before it collapsed in sleep beside Ranger. Ethan sat watching them, listening to the rain slow to a drizzle. He could feel something shifting in the house. Not the creaks or sighs of age, but something deeper, like the quiet exhale of a secret finally acknowledged. He looked again at the photograph on the shelf. The boy in the picture held a puppy in his arms. The same golden coat, the same eyes. Ranger raised his head, ears forward, staring at the photograph too. Ethan whispered, "This was his dog, wasn't it?" Ranger didn't move. The fire crackled softly. Somewhere in the distance, thunder grumbled one last warning. Ethan leaned back, exhaustion washing over him. For the first time in a long time, the house felt less empty. But as he closed his eyes, the floor beneath the photograph gave a faint, hollow sound, like something shifting beneath the boards. Ranger's ears flicked up again, his gaze fixed on that spot, body tense. Ethan opened his eyes, whispered, "What now, boy?" The wind outside fell silent, and from beneath the floor came a sound no storm could make, the slow, deliberate click of metal against wood. Chapter 3. the light at the edge of despair. The morning mist rose slowly from the valley, dissolving into pale sunlight that spread across the hills like mercy. The house on the hill looked less haunted in daylight, still broken, but no longer menacing, like a wounded animal finally letting someone near. Ethan Cole stood on the porch, sleeves rolled up, hammer in hand, a man learning again how to build rather than bury. Ranger sat a few feet away, eyes narrowed toward the woods, every sense alert as though the forest itself might lunge forward at any moment. The smaller pup, now stronger and mischievous, wrestled with a piece of rope on the porch, tail wagging with the fearless joy only the young possess. Ethan had spent the past week repairing what he could. The roof no longer leaked, the windows could almost close, and he had even found an old stove that came alive with enough coaxing and profanity. The work was hard, the food scarce, but the rhythm of labor was a kind of prayer. For the first time in years, his hands were doing more than surviving. They were creating. It was in that rhythm that Grace Holloway began to visit. She would appear in the late mornings, walking up the path with a wicker basket hooked over her arm. She was a tall woman in her late 40s, her long brown hair usually tied beneath a faded blue scarf, a smudge of flour often dusting her cheek. Her eyes, a soft gray-green, carried the steady calm of someone who had endured storms without breaking. She would smile when she saw Ranger first, always Ranger, and he, sensing her kind nature, wagged his tail approvingly. "Morning, Mr. Cole," she said one day, setting the basket on the porch. "I brought you something warm. Don't argue. I know men who live alone forget how to eat properly." Ethan leaned on the porch railing, wiping sweat from his brow. "I could argue, but I reckon you'd win." "Smart man," Grace said, smiling faintly. "I made stew, rabbit and potatoes. It's not much, but it's hot." He thanked her quietly, and as she unpacked the food, Ranger sniffed approvingly while the pup wagged in unrestrained excitement. Grace laughed, her voice like something fragile finally remembering how to sound alive. They ate together on the steps, trading stories about the town, about the loneliness that hung over Birch Hollow like a permanent fog. Ethan told her a little about his old life, his years in the factory, the layoffs. Grace told him about losing her husband, Tom, 5 years earlier to pneumonia, and about how she'd kept the general store running mostly to have someone to talk to each day. The conversation was gentle, cautious, two people learning to trust again. Over the next days, her visits became more frequent. Sometimes she brought bread, sometimes tools, sometimes just herself. Ethan didn't notice when the habit of expecting her began. It crept in as quietly as sunrise. Yet beneath the warmth of her presence, something in the house still whispered. Some nights, when the wind pressed against the walls, Ethan could hear faint metallic taps from under the floor, like a heartbeat muffled by wood. He told himself it was the pipes, though the house had none that worked. One afternoon, as Ethan replaced a warped floorboard in the living room, Ranger began to paw furiously at a patch near the fireplace. The dog growled softly, claws scratching against the old boards. "Easy, boy," Ethan said, kneeling. "What have you got there?" He pried up the plank with his crowbar. Beneath, half buried in dust and cobwebs, was a metal box, square, heavy, sealed with rusted latches. It had the dull sheen of something important forgotten. Ranger sniffed at it and sat back, ears flat, uneasy. Ethan felt a chill even in the warmth of the afternoon. Grace arrived just as he carried the box onto the porch. "You look like you found buried treasure," she teased, wiping her hands on her apron. "Or trouble," Ethan replied, setting it down. "Found this under the floor. Must have belonged to the man who lived here. J. Monroe. You remember the name?" Grace's smile faded slightly. "Monroe. Yes. He was a deputy once. Kind man, quiet. Died in an accident years back. Or that's what we were told. His family moved away soon after. Why?" Ethan flipped the latch open. Inside, wrapped in old cloth, lay a leather-bound notebook and a stack of yellowed papers. There was also a silver badge, tarnished but still gleaming faintly. He picked up the notebook, its pages filled with cramped handwriting and dates. As he skimmed, his jaw tightened. "This isn't just a diary," he murmured. "It's a report. Names, case numbers, and something about missing evidence." Grace leaned closer, brow furrowed. "Evidence of what?" He turned a page, reading aloud. "Suspect in custody. Pressure to close case. Ordered to dispose of." He stopped. the ink smeared where the sentence had been hastily crossed out. Beneath, a single word remained legible: cover-up. A gust of wind swept across the porch, scattering loose papers. The smaller pup barked, chasing them as they tumbled into the yard. Grace caught one against her leg, glancing down at it. A photo of two men in uniform standing beside a patrol car. One was Monroe. The other wore the same crooked half-smile she'd seen a dozen times in town. "Ethan," she whispered. "This man, that's Sheriff Hale." Ethan's eyes hardened. Sheriff Walter Hale was the law in Birch Hollow. Mid-50s, broad-shouldered, with a gray mustache trimmed to perfection, and the smooth confidence of a man who believed the world was built for him. He was the kind of authority you didn't question, because no one ever had. Ethan remembered the way the man's stare had followed him, the day he arrived in town, assessing, measuring. Now that memory sat like a stone in his gut. Grace's voice dropped. "If that notebook says what I think it does, Hale's been hiding something. Monroe must have tried to expose it." Ethan closed the box slowly. "And now it's sitting in my house." Ranger growled again, eyes fixed on the tree line as though expecting someone to step out of the shadows. Ethan followed his gaze but saw nothing, only the fog beginning to return, swallowing the edge of the woods. He exhaled. "Grace, I don't know what this is, but I need time to think." She nodded, worry softening her face. "Be careful, Ethan. Birch Hollow doesn't forgive curiosity." That night, Ethan couldn't sleep. The house creaked and moaned, the sound of old timber shifting under the weight of memory. He sat at the kitchen table, lantern flickering, the notebook open before him. Page after page spoke of corruption, bribes, names of people he didn't know, and one name he did: Grace's late husband, Tom Holloway. His signature appeared beside Monroe's on an incident report. But what connected them? Ranger lifted his head suddenly, ears pricking. Outside, gravel crunched under slow, deliberate footsteps. The lantern flame quivered. Ethan moved to the window. Through the mist, he saw the faint glow of headlights parked at the bottom of the hill, two of them, unmoving. He whispered, "Someone knows." Ranger stood, muscles coiled, a low growl rising from his chest. The pup whimpered softly, pressing close to Ethan's leg. Ethan reached for his rifle and blew out the lantern. The darkness folded around them. He could feel his heartbeat echoing in the silence. And from outside, cutting through the fog, came a voice he recognized, calm, commanding, practiced. "Evening, Mr. Cole. Sheriff Hale here. Mind if we talk?" Chapter 4. The Night of Fire and Loyalty. The night was unnaturally still. Birch Hollow lay under a thin veil of fog, the moon half hidden behind clouds that moved like slow smoke. From the hill, Ethan could see the faint glimmer of town lights far below, flickering, fragile, unaware. Inside the house, the lantern burned low, casting a warm glow across the wooden walls that had finally begun to feel like home. Ranger slept near the door, his breathing slow but alert even in rest, while the little pup lay curled against his flank, dreaming without fear. Ethan sat at the table, the metal box open before him once again. The notebook and papers were spread out in careful order. He had spent the entire day reading, deciphering Monroe's tight handwriting, trying to understand what the man had uncovered. It was all there: bribery, false arrests, a trail of missing money, and all of it led back to one name: Sheriff Walter Hale. He rubbed his forehead, exhaustion seeping into his bones. "I should have burned it," he muttered. "I should have never opened that damn floorboard." Ranger stirred, ears twitching. He lifted his head, eyes reflecting the dim light. Ethan met his gaze. "You think we can just walk away?" The dog blinked once, slow and solemn, as if understanding that walking away had never been their nature. A sound broke the stillness, a car engine, muffled by distance, climbing the dirt road that wound toward the hill. Ethan's heart began to hammer. He rose and blew out the lantern, plunging the room into darkness. Ranger was already on his feet, growling low, the pup whimpering softly beside him. Headlights cut through the mist outside, twin beams sliding across the trees. A pickup truck stopped at the foot of the porch. 3 silhouettes stepped out, heavy, broad-shouldered men in work jackets. One of them carried a canister. Ethan whispered, "So, it's come to this." He grabbed his rifle and moved to the window. The leader of the group stepped into the light, Sheriff Hale, his wide-brimmed hat shadowing his eyes, the edges of his gray mustache catching the moonlight. His face, once calm and commanding, now looked carved from cold stone. Behind him stood Roy Denton, a thick-set deputy with a jaw like a brick and eyes too small for his face, and Cal Ridge, the town's mechanic, wiry and nervous, always seen smoking but never smiling. Hale's voice carried clearly through the night. "Mr. Cole," he called, tone almost friendly, "we just want what you found. Hand it over, and nobody gets hurt." Ethan stayed silent. The only answer was the wind, whispering through the pines. Hale sighed, the sound strangely patient. "Don't make this difficult, son. That box doesn't belong to you." Ranger barked sharply, the kind of bark meant to warn, not bluff. Hale motioned to Roy, who stepped onto the porch. The man moved heavily, boots creaking. "Sheriff says you're smart, Cole," he growled. "Be smart and open up." Ethan chambered around. The metallic click echoed in the dark like a promise. "Step closer, and you'll find out how smart I am." Roy hesitated, glanced back at Hale. The sheriff's eyes hardened. "You think you're some kind of hero, Cole? That dog won't save you." But Ranger had already moved, silent, fast, a shadow with teeth. The door burst open, and chaos erupted. Ethan fired once into the air, just enough to scatter them, then ducked as Roy shouted and swung the rifle butt into the doorframe. Cal dropped the canister, gasoline spilling in a glistening arc across the porch boards. "Stop!" Ethan shouted. "You'll—" But Cal, panicked, lit his cigarette. A single spark that leapt to the spill like lightning meeting dry grass. The world exploded in orange. Flames roared up the porch and crawled over the walls with terrifying hunger. Ranger lunged toward the doorway, barking furiously. Smoke filled the air, thick and choking. Ethan staggered back, coughing, heat searing his face. He could see Hale retreating into the fog, shouting for his men to pull back. The sheriff's outline blurred, swallowed by firelight and smoke. Ethan grabbed the metal box, tucking it under his arm, but a beam from the ceiling cracked and fell, pinning his shoulder. He gasped, pain shooting down his side. "Ranger!" The German shepherd lunged through the smoke, teeth clamping onto Ethan's sleeve. He pulled, muscles straining, whining through the roar of the flames. The pup barked shrilly, darting around in panic, looking for a way out. Ethan tried to push the beam off, but couldn't. The heat was unbearable now, tongues of fire licking at the curtains, the walls, everything they'd rebuilt. "Go!" he shouted. "Get out, Ranger!" But Ranger didn't move. With a desperate growl, he shifted position, using his body weight to wedge under the beam, pushing, pulling, refusing to leave. The smoke made Ethan's eyes sting, tears cutting through soot on his face. "Ranger, stop!" With one final heave, the beam rolled free. Ethan stumbled backward, dragging the dog with him, both half blind from the smoke. He clutched the pup under his arm and kicked open the back door, staggering into the night. The cold air hit him like salvation. Behind them, the cabin was a furnace, flames clawing at the sky. Ranger collapsed beside him, his fur singed, sides heaving. Ethan dropped to his knees. "No, no, no, stay with me." He pressed his hands against the dog's chest. Ranger's eyes fluttered open, cloudy but aware. Down the hill, headlights appeared. Another car, Grace's car. She had come. Grace jumped out before the engine stopped, her dress catching the light, her hair unbound and tangled from the wind. Her face was pale, terrified, but determined. "Ethan!" she shouted, running toward him. "Oh my God!" He waved her back. "It's too hot. Stay back." But she didn't listen. She dropped to her knees beside Ranger, her hands trembling. "We need to get him to town. Now!" Ethan looked at the blaze. "The others, Hale." "They're gone!" she cried. "Forget them!" Together they lifted Ranger into the back of her truck, the pup whining anxiously beside him. Grace drove faster than she ever had, gravel spitting from the tires, tears streaking her soot-stained face. Ethan sat beside her, silent, his hand resting on Ranger's side, feeling the shallow rise and fall. "Hold on, boy," he whispered. "You've still got work to do." Behind them, on the distant hill, the fire burned high into the night, a signal, a funeral pyre, and a promise all at once. When they reached the small veterinary clinic on the edge of town, the lights were off. Grace pounded on the door until an elderly man appeared, Dr. Samuel Whitaker, white-haired, broad-framed, wearing suspenders over a wrinkled shirt. His face was creased by decades of sleepless nights spent saving lives that couldn't speak. "Grace," he croaked, "it's midnight." "Please, Sam," she pleaded. "It's Ranger. He's hurt." The vet's eyes softened when he saw the dog. "Bring him in." Inside, under the yellow light of the clinic, Dr. Whitaker worked in silence, steady and focused. Grace held the pup in her lap, whispering prayers. Ethan stood near the table, covered in soot, staring at his friend. Hours passed. The night outside turned pale with dawn. Finally, Whitaker straightened. "He's tough," he said quietly. "Burns along the side, smoke in the lungs. But if he makes it through the next day, he'll make it." Ethan's throat tightened. "He will," he said, voice hoarse but certain. Grace placed her hand over his. For a moment, neither spoke. Outside, the first light of morning crept over the horizon. Faint, golden, fragile, but alive. And somewhere on the hill behind them, among the ashes of the house, something metallic glimmered weakly in the soot, the corner of the metal box, half buried yet untouched by the flames. Chapter 5. The Last Spring and the True Home. Spring arrived late that year, but when it came all at once. Soft rain, warm light, and the slow green pulse of life returning to the valley. From the rebuilt porch of the cabin on the hill, Ethan Cole watched the mist lift from the trees, revealing a landscape reborn. The house no longer bore the scars of fire. Fresh timber gleamed beneath a new coat of paint, the windows clean and open to the breeze. The world had decided to forgive him. Or perhaps, he thought, to give him one last chance. Ranger lay at his feet, the morning sun spilling across his thick coat. He had survived the inferno, but carried its memory in every step. His back left leg was stiff, dragging slightly as he walked. The vet had called it permanent damage, but Ethan saw it differently. To him, it was a badge of honor, a story burned into muscle and bone. The little pup, now healthy, larger, and full of mischief, gnawed on a piece of rope nearby, occasionally nudging Ranger to play. The older dog tolerated it with quiet patience, as if teaching the young one the art of endurance. Ethan sat back in his chair, sipping coffee from a tin mug, and breathed in the scent of pine and wet soil. It had been 3 months since the fire, 3 months since everything had almost ended. The town had changed too. For once, Birch Hollow spoke his name not with suspicion, but gratitude. Newspapers had called him the $5 man, a symbol of grit and hope in hard times. Strangers came to the edge of the property to shake his hand or leave small donations, their eyes soft with admiration. Grace Holloway had been there through every step of rebuilding. She came daily, sometimes with food, sometimes with laughter, sometimes with silence, the kind that didn't need to be filled. Her store had become a gathering place for those curious about the man and his dog who had faced the fire. The tragedy had done what time alone could not. It had bound them together. That morning, she arrived early, walking up the path in her long cream-colored dress, her hair loose and glinting auburn in the sun. She carried a small potted plant, its blossoms pale yellow. "You missed a spot on the porch," she said, smiling as she held it out. "Thought this might brighten it up." Ethan grinned, taking the plant. "You know I'm no gardener." "Then it'll survive," she replied with mock seriousness. "Plants seem to do well when people leave them alone." They laughed softly. Ranger barked once, tail thumping against the porch, acknowledging her presence like a guardian allowing entry. The pup bounded toward her, muddy paws landing squarely on her dress. "Good heavens," she gasped, laughing as Ethan hurried to help. "He's got your manners." "He's got your energy," Ethan countered. Grace shook her head but smiled, brushing at the paw prints. "I'll take that as a compliment." They stood together for a moment, looking out across the valley. Birds sang from the pines, and the river below shimmered in the distance. Grace spoke quietly. "You ever think you'd end up here, Ethan? After everything?" He took a long breath. "No. I thought my road ended the day I left the factory. But maybe some roads only start after you've lost everything else." She turned to him, her gray-green eyes soft. "Then maybe this isn't the end at all." He didn't answer. Words would have broken something delicate in that silence. By summer, the cabin had become more than a home. It had turned into a sanctuary. Ethan and Grace had registered it as the Holloway Coal Rescue Shelter, a small haven for stray and abandoned dogs from nearby counties. People began showing up, truck drivers, farmers, even children, bringing dogs that had been lost, unwanted, or broken. One of the first to arrive was Miss Ellen Porter, a retired school teacher in her 70s. She was small and wiry, with sharp blue eyes that saw through excuses and a kindness that hid behind her no-nonsense tone. She had short white curls and wore sweaters even in July. When she brought a trembling brown mutt to the shelter, she said only, "He's been chained too long. Thought he deserved better." Then she stayed to help clean kennels and never quite left. Another regular was Tommy Lane, a teenager of about 16, lanky, shy, with sandy hair, and freckles that made him look younger. He had lost his father in a mining accident, and his voice carried a quiet ache when he spoke. Ethan took him under his wing, teaching him how to repair fences, feed the dogs, and listen, truly listen, when an animal trembled. Ranger, now something of a local legend, became the heart of the place. His calm presence seemed to tame even the most frightened dogs. He limped slowly among them, touching noses, correcting barks with a glance. The pup, who had grown into a strong young shepherd with bright golden fur, followed his lead faithfully, learning the ways of guardianship. Ethan finally named him Scout, saying it fit a dog always looking ahead. The days fell into a pattern of work and quiet joy. Grace managed the visitors and paperwork, while Ethan handled repairs and training. In the evenings, they sat on the porch together, watching the sunset bleed into the hills. Sometimes they spoke of the past, but more often they didn't. Some wounds didn't need reopening. They healed best in the presence of peace. Every so often, Ethan's thoughts returned to Sheriff Hale. The man had resigned soon after the fire, citing health issues. No charges had been filed. The official story was an accidental blaze. But Birch Hollow wasn't fooled. Whispers spread quietly, and respect for Hale's name faded like smoke. Ethan never sought revenge. Life had done that work for him. One evening, late in autumn, a local reporter visited to write a follow-up story. She was Sarah Reed, a young woman in her late 20s, sharp-featured with chestnut hair tied in a bun, eyes alert with curiosity. She wore practical boots and a corduroy jacket too big for her frame. "I heard you're not much for talking," she said as she set up her camera. Ethan smiled faintly. "Talking never built a roof or healed a dog." She chuckled. "Then maybe I'll just listen." During the interview, she asked, "If you could tell people one thing, what would it be? After everything that happened, the fire, the loss, the rebuilding." Ethan looked at Ranger, lying peacefully beside the porch steps, Scout asleep next to him. Grace sat on the swing, watching them all with quiet affection. He said, "That loyalty saves more than one life. Sometimes the one you're saving is your own." Sarah lowered her camera, eyes bright. "That's beautiful, Mr. Cole." "Don't thank me," he said, nodding toward Ranger. "He wrote the story." That night, after everyone left, the valley fell silent again. The moon rose silver and whole. Ethan stood outside, hands in his pockets, breathing in the cool air. Ranger hobbled up beside him, pressing his shoulder against the man's leg. "Looks like we finally found it, huh?" Ethan said softly. "A place worth staying." Ranger gazed up at him, eyes reflecting the starlight, and gave a single wag of his tail. Slow, certain. Inside, Grace played a record on the old player, a soft tune, distant and sweet. The light from the window framed her silhouette, calm and waiting. Ethan turned toward the door, smiled faintly, and whispered, "Come on, old friend. Let's go home." And together, man and dog stepped into the warm light, closing the long road behind them. Sometimes, miracles don't arrive with thunder or angels. They come on four legs, carrying scars and loyalty instead of wings. Ethan thought he had lost everything, but God had simply cleared his path so he could see what truly mattered: love, faith, and the quiet courage to begin again. Maybe that's how God works in our everyday lives. Not through grand signs, but through small mercies. A loyal friend, a stranger's kindness, a second chance. And sometimes, through a dog who refuses to let go. So, tonight, if you are watching this story and you've felt the weight of loss or loneliness, remember this: you are never walking alone. Miracles may already be waiting at your door. All you have to do is open it. May God bless you and every creature that brings light into your life. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. So, together we can keep spreading stories of hope, faith, and the gentle miracles that remind us we're all still loved.